Schrödinger's cat is, of course, like a famous example of the, I think, what is like the uncertainty principle, which is, all, of course, making fun of that principle. Basically, the idea that something is, that cat is both alive and not alive at the same time. Schrödinger was, of course, mocking that sort of uncertainty principle. Yet many people still seem to believe that they can do that. They can both claim, no, 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 I'm just a comedian. I'm just making fun. But also, I'm a real expert, or I'm really trying to put something interesting out there. That is what Douglas Murray has called out Joe Rogan and Dave Smith on, even though I've seen some people trying to say that no, 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 only Dave Smith was called out, but maybe Douglas Murray didn't put it really strongly towards Joe Rogan, that's what he's doing. But if you have any ability to create abstractions and from particulars, then you can see that he was also calling out Joe Rogan. And in the afterwards, weeks after, Joe Rogan is starting to make fun of Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray will most likely not be invited again. Also, Douglas Murray has commented on this a bit. We can watch a video. One I haven't looked up who was on Joe Rogan, but we'll watch one clip where they talk about that. Uh, Welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is James Valiant, and yeah, today we'll talk about generally that kind of attitude that is coming out of Joe Rogan, and also what does that say about him, and most particularly the people who listen to him. Again, he is one of the most listened to podcasts and have been for a while. And I don't think it says the nicest thing about our culture. Joining me today is James Valiant. James, yeah, just for start, we'll go to the crib almost immediately. But yeah, what do you make of both that whole thing? For those who don't remember, basically Douglas Murray has called out Dave Smith and Joe Rogan for sort of like trying to have their cake and eat it too, sort of like saying, well, we are just talking about this stuff, but not having any responsibility towards, well, the misinformation they really put out, and sort of trying to hide behind, well, but I'm not saying this is a fact. I'm just saying, I'm just asking questions.
Yeah, Joe Rogan hosted a debate between Murray and the American libertarian Dave Smith, who's basically a comedian. And people talked about, when Douglas Murray asked the rhetorical question to Smith, have you been to there? Have you been to Israel or been near Gaza or in Gaza, as he has been as a journalist? And of course, you don't have to actually go, but what fairly you'd interpret that as meaning is, what is your background? What is your expertise? What do you know about this? And there is a point to knowing what the hell you're talking about. If you really are poorly informed about the subject, you shouldn't be spouting off with opinions, much less mocking the other person for their expertise, which is what it turns out to be. And that's sort of an assault on reason itself. There is a role for experts. There are people who know all kinds of stuff better than, we each of us specialize. So, I mean, I'm no brain surgeon, I'm no rocket scientist. And if, you need an opinion on those kind of things, please don't come to me because I haven't studied. I'm very poorly informed on the details of rocket science and brain surgery. So there's a role for experts, and and I can evaluate the expert themselves based on their factual basis and their expertise, the basis for their opinion. There's no question we can still critically evaluate experts, but there's an important role for experts. And if you can't respond, if someone says, well, have you been there? And you can't respond, well, no, but I've read 16 books on the subject, I've spoken to people who've been there on both sides, et cetera, then, maybe what it was an invitation to describe what his factual basis for having his opinion was. And Dave Smith has a pretty horrible opinion, an opinion which is, intrinsicist against violence. And then when they laugh about it, it's really funny because the point they're making is about violence. And here they are just laughing and yucking it up. So if indeed Israel is committing some kind of genocide or being cruel and ruthless in Gaza, actually they're protecting themselves. Israel is safer now than it was on October 6th. Let's put it that way, even though they're still facing attacks. Nonetheless, these guys yuck it up like comedians and don't, and they mock the idea of having any expertise or being well informed on the subject that you're publicly talking about. That's pretty reprehensible. I mean, please at least cite me a book you've read, Mr. Smith or Joe Rogan. And for comedians, just to, if they take seriously what they're saying, well, violence is awful. This is, civilians being killed in Gaza. Why are they yucking it up? Why are they treating it so lightly? It's dismissive. It's in effect an attack on reason, an attack on intellectualism as such, an attack on being well informed, an attack on expertise. Sure, Murray overstated the case, but it was really an invitation to how the hell do you come to this opinion? What do you know about the situation? What do you know about the history? What do you know about what's going on the ground in Gaza? But rather than taking that as a rational invitation to describe the foundation, the factual foundation for his opinion, they mock him. They mock him, horribly by zeroing in on that one aspect of what he said. Totally unfair.
Yeah, and we'll go to the clip, but sort of just one more comment, or the sort of, I think the need for experts, I think more than sort of being that some kind of authority that just imposes itself, which is the wrong way to think about it, is those are the people who can get the full context. Because the fact is that, and that's what you see, oftentimes you don't even have to ask Dave Smith if he read any books. The type of rhetoric somebody is using, the type of argument somebody is using. I mean, just think of if there are, if people in the audience are objectivists, or for that matter, if you are expert in any field, if you are an expert, or if you know something, you can immediately tell when somebody doesn't know anything about it. They can even cite things, they can tell you things, but you can tell from the way they are talking. I mean, with sort of objectivism, you could say somebody who uses arguments against Rand, like she took Social Security, or that selfishness is just, stealing from other people. You can tell, like, okay, so you haven't actually read anything. You can immediately sort of tell. So that is sort of the need for experts, is having that, like, that context, having all of the information in and being able to pick out the information out of that to what it needs, instead of just what you see for those who watch the Joe Rogan, Dave Smith, and Douglas Murray, that sort of thing. When Dave Smith puts out, well, this prime minister in like 2000 said this like one sentence, so it's clear that all of Israeli society is like that. And we had that exact same thing on Monday's The Reality Show, where somebody was trying to say that Israel is an apartheid state, and they used a quote from Ariel Sharon from like 1976 or something. It's like, oh, great, thank you. Before Oslo, before all of that, it's like, wow, that's a really sloppy kind of journalism.
You should be able to discern a bad argument just on the face of it. In most cases, not in all cases. Sometimes you do need the expertise to tease through a very specific issue. But yeah, if someone makes an argument of that kind, rather than focused on the facts, and as many facts as you can that are relevant to the topic, if you're just going to quote someone out of context, I mean, I can quote someone out of context for just about any absurd thing in this world. Or if I drop the context of the original statement, such as a statement by Ariel Sharon or something, 40 or 50 years ago, then, what is the factual connection? You have to connect the dots. You have to do some logical integration, and you have to cite me how the facts come together for that. See, it's the facts that belie the idea that Israel is an apartheid state, or that what's going on is a genocide, or anything like that. Consider the actual facts. For example, if Israel had wanted to commit a genocide on the people of Gaza, they could have easily wiped out their population by now, almost entirely, just using conventional weapons. But they did not. And so the whole idea of an intent to commit a genocide is belied by big, obvious facts. And don't quote me someone as an authority. If you're going to use an argument from authority, connect the dots. Show me how that opinion is connected to facts of reality, and how that integrates into an understanding of what's going on. And as you say, it's if you quote someone before, oh God, Oslo and all the events of the last 25, 30 years, Israel pulled out of Gaza. 20 years ago, they pulled out of Gaza and they forcibly removed Israelis from Gaza. So the Palestinians of Gaza have, in effect, had their own state. We have, in reality, had practice with the, quote, two-state solution. And what do we get? October 7th. In fact, all the years between the time Hamas took over Gaza and today, what has Hamas been doing? Lobbing rockets as much as they can towards Israel. That, why don't you consider the facts on the ground? Why did you consider what actually will bring peace in the long run? And rather than do that, they just mock the other person and laugh. And laughing is kind of the worst kind of argument. It really is. Because what you're doing is it's a personal attack. It's an ad hominem. It is anti-intellectual. Laughing is the worst kind of argument from intimidation. If people are interested, there's an article by Ayn Rand that she wrote 60 years ago, Argument from Intimidation. You can find it in The Virtue of Selfishness. And laughing is perhaps kind of the ugliest form of argument from intimidation. Most people would get it if I said, believe me or I'll shoot you. Okay, that's not a good argument. But if they laugh, people are somehow psychologically disarmed by the laughter. But the laughter really only undermines their opinion. I'm not saying that laughter is a bad thing. Laughter, of course, is a wonderful thing. I do it all the time. But I do it in light of everything I know. After I've put the facts together, after I've integrated things, there are things worthy of mocking. I'm not saying that either. But if what you're doing is laughing at the person rather than opening the lid and considering his argument, it's just a rank, maybe the worst form of argument from intimidation, as Ayn Rand would call it.
So let's actually listen to that Joe Rogan part. Again, this is the more recent part after the Douglas Murray interview.
There is an argument to be made that, starvation and stuff like that and people dying is worse than a podcast.
But wait a minute.
I wouldn't
Wait
make
a minute
it.
before you say that. Have you been there?
Right, that's a good point.
You haven't been?
By the way, how is he in all these wars? Can I just go to wars? By the way, how are you allowed to just go to wars? Is
you
that the way
you should at least
Can you just
have the
go to
courtesy of going there.
Can I just go to wars, or do I have to come back and say what people want me to say about the wars? Can I go to the wars and have my own opinions, or do I have to have the opinions?
Not if you want to go back.
That's right. It's
Okay, they go on for a bit longer, which we can watch later if we want. Hopefully, we won't have to. But, something to remember, like Joe Rogan was called out, and now he's sort of like making fun of Douglas Murray's, and again, that wasn't the point of the interview. That's the sort of thing you can see where somebody is clearly not interested in truth and is only trying to sort of delegitimize the other person. Because, the sort of, have you been there? You could say, I don't even think Douglas Murray meant it as an argument necessarily, like this is like destroying you. It was more of a surprise that somebody who cares about it doesn't actually go visit sort of like any part of Israel, any part of the Palestinian territories, yet they talk about it every single day. And of course, Joe Rogan here is mocking the whole thing and sort of trying to encapsulate all of Douglas Murray's argument in that one thing, which of course it wasn't. The whole thing was about the fact that Joe Rogan invites whoever wants to come on, invites anti-Semites, invites World War II revisionists, invites these kind of people with no pushback. Definitely no pushback from him, and definitely not anybody sort of by his side that would sort of try to push back against it. I mean, again, when there is some area that there is sort of like a consensus or there is an understanding when it comes to history, when you have somebody who sort of tries to put on a different narrative and is not challenged by, when somebody listens to it, they'll come away with just, well, I guess this is also right, or this is also correct, not realizing that all those arguments have already been debunked. There is no difference between sort of inviting World War II revisionists, inviting like pro-Hamas propagandists, compared to people doing like Nazi revisionism, people doing any that sort of thing, or trying to, or sort of like a, concentration camp conspiracies, or like a Holocaust denialism. You are committing to the exact same thing.
Yes, you may as well have Candace Owens going on to say space is fake and gay. You know what I mean? May as well have a flat earther on. There are some very wrong, irresponsible opinions which should not, if it's not censorship. If we at RQK do not platform someone, it is not. It is not censorship if Joe Rogan decides not to have some kook on. In fact, it would show some epistemological discretion on his part. What Douglas Murray, as I say, was doing was inviting the person to explain their factual basis for coming to their opinion, and take the thing they started out with, starvation in Gaza. I mean, if he had been to the area, he would see that their numbers have not significantly decreased, and that they've got a lot of well-fed Palestinians. So rather than point to facts about some huge percentage of the population that's actually starving to death, if they could actually point to that, when in fact the exact opposite is true, then they mock it, then they laugh about something like starvation. So if he believes that starvation is going on in Gaza, I want the facts. I want the actual foundation for his opinion here. But then they go on to laugh and mock. And how do you get to go to the area? Yeah, Israel isn't going to let just anyone near the area. That's right. And why do you suppose that is? I mean, it is absolutely absurd. It is mentally irresponsible. It is dumb. If I can use common parlance, it is stupid. So these people are putting up their stupidity on display and using the cover of laughter to cover up their stupidity. That's the only way of putting it.
Yeah, and so the guy who was on with Joe Rogan was Tim Dillon. I just looked it up. Just quickly, one more thing about sort of the attitude of Joe Rogan. Again, he invited Douglas Murray. Even on the show, he said he sort of like appreciates his perspective, and then he like makes fun of him. What kind of attitude towards sort of like anybody that is the fact that you invite somebody repeatedly, somebody you supposedly respect, and then you make fun of? So were you wrong to invite him, or what's really going on? Now, Douglas Murray wrote an article for the New York Post after this interview, where he said, and I'm not sure if this is confirmed by Joe Rogan, but that Douglas Murray could have only come if Dave Smith was present. Now, again, what does that say about sort of Joe Rogan's type of podcast? Is the fact that he is willing to invite pro-Hamas propagandists, pro-Palestinian propagandists, conspiracy theories or conspiracies, World War II and Holocaust revisionists. But when he invites someone who is pro-Israel, then he needs somebody else there to sort of combat that type of rhetoric. Again, Joe Rogan is clearly has certain, and even when I mean, when I remember watching sort of the Douglas Murray interview, I think Douglas Murray asked sort of Joe Rogan about like his opinion, and I think Joe Rogan at first tried to moderate himself. He said, "I think the way Israel has waged this war," and then he realized he was coming out to moderate, has something he had to add: the brutal or the terrible way the Israel has been waging this war is something that has gone too far. And even during this clip where we played, Tim Dillon was trying to say that the so-called, or he said, starvation that Israel is bringing upon Palestinians is worse than doing some podcasts. And again, that's sort of the minimizing of harm, the idea that as long as there is something worse happening, somehow nobody else can like do bad things. Like because there is a war somewhere, I mean, you could say that about like people who were doing like Saddam Hussein. No, not Saddam Hussein. The guy in Syria. Can you remind me his name?
Hafez Assad.
Assad. When you had like Assad apologist when we knew what was happening, you could say, well, because there are things happening there, we cannot criticize like people who are spreading like Assad propaganda. That's clearly not true. You can
Village idiot stupidity. Okay, so after no, more than just October 7th, after decades of Islamic terrorism and violence, what is the correct response? A podcast? A podcast? Frankly, I would have gone on and said, yeah, of course they should be, all food should be cut off. In effect, we should put pressure. It is perfectly appropriate in warfare to cut off the food supply of the enemy who's trying to kill you, who's been continuously lobbing rockets at you for many years. Perfectly reasonable. What do you do in the face of October 7th? A podcast? That would have been the rational response? No, these guys are village idiot stupid. And as I say, the intimidating cover for that kind of village idiot stupidity is, of course, village idiot laughter. That's my analysis of this. These guys are putting dumb on display. These guys are putting anti-intellectualism and poor argumentation rather than do any kind of moral argument about the nature of war and what is an appropriate response when you're actually in war, rather than analyzing Islamic culture in the West Bank or in Gaza or among Islamic terrorist groups that have been slaughtering people for decades. How do you respond to that? Or do you just do a podcast? I mean, that is village idiot level stupidity. And it's what we expect from village idiots, some dumb laugh as a justification. You see, it's a kind of emotional comfort. I don't mean to psychologize, but obviously if all you're getting here is that kind of poorly informed, and I'm going to dig in my heels and have a poorly informed opinion that I publicly broadcast, a totally irresponsible opinion that I make public announce to the world and advocate, you should be informed. But no, they're mocking the idea of being informed, and then they drop all context. Now, Joe Rogan is mentally irresponsible about such a serious issue. A podcast would be the appropriate response. My God.
Somebody says in the chat, it's the same as when they bring up the Azov Battalion and fascists in Ukraine. Yeah, it is. And again, even when you bring up starvation, there is no starvation happening in Gaza. I wish that the way Israel has waged this war would actually be rightfully so, will actually be sort of like not allowing any aid to your enemies, not allowing any sort of ability for your enemies to survive.
It would bring peace sooner. If what they want is peace, then what you need is a strong execution of the war that drives them to complete unilateral, unconditional surrender. If you want peace, like we have now with Japan, or peace between Britain and the United States and Germany, what you do is you fight them tooth and nail to the point where they unconditionally surrender or are completely wiped out. Those are the only options. If you are a lover of peace, if you want the kind of peace that exists today between the countries in Europe, or if you want the kind of peace that exists today between the United States and Japan, what you do is you fight wars like we did in World War II, where you don't feed the enemy, where you cause them to be psychologically crushed to the point of unilateral, unconditional surrender.
Yeah, and somebody says, correction, Daniel, not the way Israel has waged the war, but the way the international but in the skies have forced Israel to wage this war. Well, I still believe, while I think it's sort of like a separate, the fact is Israel is a sovereign nation and it has decided the way to wage the war. Now, of course, a lot of blame is on the international community for not giving Israel sort of the justice support it needs. But again, when it comes to it, it is sort of like the individual sort of decision. And you cannot do that when Israel, hopefully it won't happen, but when Israel, or if Israel gets wiped out because it was unwilling to actually defend itself, we could say that that is the fault of international community, but the fact would be that Israel is wiped out because it didn't do what
Well,
was necessary.
these laughing monkeys would no doubt let Iran get a nuclear bomb. You know how benevolent that would be for humanity. No, it's despicable. And despicable to laugh, you basically use comedy as a way of discussing the issue. Douglas Murray was trying to seriously discuss the issue, and now they're just using ridicule alone, poorly informed, morally perverse ridicule, and they're just yucking it up. It is mentally irresponsible. Philosophers would say epistemologically irresponsible of what they're doing here, and an emotional attack, an emotionalist attack from the worst kind of argument from authority, illogical argument from authority, based on falsehoods, based on actual falsehoods that their premises consist of. Joe Rogan couldn't stand to have a Douglas Murray on his show by himself. That tells you all about Joe Rogan that you need to know. The man is mentally ill-equipped to discuss serious issues.
And so thankfully we're running out of time, so we don't have to play the rest of the clip. It wasn't that important. But just to finish with this is, again, what kind of people are still interested in watching Joe Rogan? The type of people who, hammer on the sort of mainstream media for not showing you the truth, not, showing you what's really happening. And whenever, I think we are at the point where alternative media has really failed. And I'll be happy when we go to mainstream media. With all its faults, at least they do some reporting. They go to the actual locations. And we can actually, do actual news from what they are doing instead of this chair commentary.
Armchair commentary. There was a time when people would go to journalism school to learn how to find facts, corroborate facts, determine what the truth is, and then present a correct, based on your hierarchy of values, no doubt, which also have to be objective, but based on your evaluation of the situation, based on the actual facts that you can corroborate and confirm. And there used to be a serious profession called journalism. And that too is an area of expertise. In my country, Columbia or Yale or Northwestern or Missouri are famous for their journalism schools, where people actually learn how to find and corroborate facts so that they can have an objective report about, and not have history suffer as a result of this kind of laughing monkey sort of evaluation of a situation. That is one of the really sad parts of alternative media and the podcast world. We are an exception to that. This is obviously a podcast, but I hope that people can see the qualitative difference between the kind of broadcasts we do and experts we have on, the facts that we marshal in support of our arguments. There's a huge difference between that and insisting, for example, that some libertarian whack job comedian be on with Douglas Murray, who has in fact actually been to the area and might have some facts that would correct their ridiculous opinions. I'm going to try to put it nicely.
Yeah, and even that Dave Smith's problem is not that he doesn't have the facts, is his one, he has a completely wrong even framing or ability to frame any sort of thing. People should look up our older episodes on Dave Smith. I think we talked more than enough about sort of his problems, his morality, and the way he looks at each conflict. Even if he had all the right facts, I don't think he would be able to correctly do with those facts what is necessary, and that is his biggest fault.
Facts do not integrate themselves. That requires an active use of reason, a proper conceptualization and the proper application of logic, and a thorough integration of all that you know about the subject. Yes, that's a really good point, Daniel. And their objectivism, again, has a unique perspective on this. If you want your opinions to accurately, your abstractions to accurately reflect what's going on and to inform you correctly about what to do about it, you've got to use this thing called logic, this thing called reason. You have to properly conceptualize what's going on based on the facts. And again, as I say, objectivism has a unique perspective on this. And we here at the Ayn Rand Center UK deploy that unique system of, respect for facts and logic that is harder and harder to find anywhere these days, whether on podcasts, television journalism, or even sadly in most print media, which often in the English-speaking world, as we've pointed out many times, simply accepts Hamas lies and Hamas distortions as fact. Because they have no way of even evaluating the situation. You're right. They don't bring the proper tools, the mental tools and equipment to even have a valid opinion, in my view.
And we'll be continuing bringing that perspective on the reality show coming up in just a few minutes or so, talking about the coming Palestinian civil war, most likely. So make sure to join us for that. Thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Join us with the link in the chat. See you in a bit.
Be safe.